7:01 PM, and I'm calling the May 20th, 2025 Planning Board meeting to order with an echo. So this meeting is being recorded by HW Cam. The first thing that I'll do is take roll. So Planning Board members, when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton.
Present.
Jonathan Poor.
Jonathan Poor, present.
Emil Dahlquist.
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr.
Present.
Darcy Dale.
Darcy Dale, present.
Matt Hamill.
Present.
Jeff Austin.
Jeff Austin, present.
And Marnie Crouch, present. And I note for the record that Bill Wheaton is not here at the moment. The first item on our agenda is a public hearing on a special permit application. And Mark, would you please read the public notice and confirm that the requisite notice was given to the abutters? Oh, excuse me, is someone here representing the small wireless facility applicant?
The applicant is requesting a postponement, but I believe the attorney, Ed Pear, is on the Zoom call.
Right, so please excuse me. I realized I was aware that they were seeking a postponement, but I should take that matter first. So we actually have a continued public hearing on that special permit application. So if the applicant is on Zoom, I will hear them and we can vote to continue the public hearing on that special permit application.
Yeah, good evening, Madam Chair. Ed Parry here for the applicant. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can see myself now.
You have a twin, so do I. I have a real one.
Wow. So I'm here on behalf of AT&T. As you may recall, back on April 1st, we appeared for the first hearing on the small cell facility on a utility pole. Some of the neighbors and abutters requested through the planning board that we look for other pole opportunities that could satisfy AT&T's coverage needs. We have looked at one of the poles that was suggested down along the corner of Bay and Walnut. That pole is not available from National Grid, but the next pole from it is available. We're in the process of licensing that, and as soon as we can get that pole approved by National Grid and get an application filed, we'll be back before you with an application for a special permit on that particular location. We cannot proceed this evening. While we go through that due diligence, I expect that we will have an application before you and pending in time for your meeting on July 15th, at which time I'd expect a public hearing on that particular pole location would take place.
So will that be an entirely new application, or do you intend to just continue the public hearing on the existing application?
If it would be an entirely new application, because it would be new abutters that would have to be notified.
notice,
So we would go through that process. We don't know if the poll's actually available, which is why we're requesting a continuance of this matter. If the other poll does become available and is approved, we'll obviously withdraw this one.
Okay, so just for convenience and whatnot, we will continue this public hearing. And then if the other poll becomes available, then you will file a new application. There'll be a new notice issued, and we'll proceed on that application. So at
Need a
this,
motion?
I do need a motion.
I make a motion that we continue this special permit application. Second?
Right, so when I call your name, would you please indicate your assent to this motion? Pat Norton?
Madam Chair, if you do need to have it as a date certain, though.
To July 15th then?
That would be our request, yes.
Okay, yes. So could you amend your motion?
I
Beth?
will amend my motion that we postpone this, or continue this hearing until July 15th, 2025. Second.
Okay, so Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist.
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So we will see you on the 15th, but you may not see me because I believe I'm on vacation.
Okay. But thank you all very much. We appreciate it.
Yes, no problem. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
Okay, so,
Can we make a comment as the abutters?
sure.
Is there a way you can let us know if your meeting's going to be continued so we don't have to show up if the.
Well, it's continued to July 15th, and,
Yeah, but we didn't know that this meeting was going to be continued.
oh, I apologize for that.
Nobody know, we got notified about the first meeting, but not about this was listed in all the town, schedules as meeting today on this subject. So if we could be notified if it gets continued so we don't have to come.
Right, so it is continued to July 15th. And I think that to be safe, why don't you just contact Mark Connors before the 15th to make sure that, that we will go forward on that date, or whether there's a new application, in which case the July 15th matter will be canceled and there'll be a new notice period. But if you were to call him, I think that's the safest way of avoiding a trip here unnecessarily. I would put the onus on Mark, but I know how busy he is. He's got a lot of balls in the air, so I would hate to have him inadvertently not contact you, but I'm sure if you reach out to him, he'll let you know the status.
I'll give you
Mark,
my information.
Mark, do they have access to does the public have access to
Yeah, if you look at the calendar, you can get the.
and you can get the agenda, and the agenda is printed up the day before, and so if the hearing is going to be continued, this agenda from yesterday or the day before had the fact that it would probably be continued.
Right, so if you go on the Town of Hamilton's website, and you look at government, and it'll have all boards and commissions, and you can go down to planning board or planning director, and you will see Mark's phone number and his email address. And you can also, it will have meetings and agendas as a topic too, and you can look at that, and you would see the agenda and see that the hearing on the special permit was continued.
I'm not clear which poll he's talking about that he's going to apply for.
I think it's down toward the railroad tracks. I think it's farther away from the original one. Right, exactly. That was the suggestion, that it be moved down there. So that's what he said. He's looking into that, and, yeah, so he's looking into whether they can get a license for that pole. And if he does, he'll file a new application. The one that involved you as abutters will be withdrawn. So apologies for coming out here. At least you didn't drive into Boston.
There's always a silver lining.
I'm trying to give you a silver lining. Oh, geez, sorry. Okay. So the next item on our agenda is a site plan application by Iron Ox Farm. And Mark, could you read the public notice for that application? This is where I started.
Sure.
And also confirm that the abutters were properly notified.
Yes. The Hamilton Planning Board will hold a public hearing to review a site plan application pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 10, and Section 10.6 of the Hamilton zoning bylaw on May 20th, 2025 at 7 p.m. at the Hamilton Wenham Public Library, 14 Union Street, Hamilton. The applicant, Iron Ox Farm, proposes to construct a 24 by 36 open-air structure to support agricultural operations at 656 Asbury Road, Assessor's Map 19, Lot 6, owned by the Essex County Greenbelt Association. Property is located within the Residence Agricultural District. Application and plan papers are on file with the Hamilton Building Department, with the contact information listed for the building department.
Is someone here for the applicant? Come on up. And could you please identify yourself?
Hello, my name is Alex Ceccanelli, owner-operator of Iron Ox Farm.
Well, I will note that our planning director provided us with a memorandum as to your application, and it appears that you are building a pavilion that's 24 feet by 36 feet, and it's primarily for you and your employees for the storage of your farm products.
Correct. Yes.
So I reviewed the memorandum. It appears to comply with all elements of our site plan review bylaw. And so I have no questions for you other than whether you have a lot of flowers. Just kidding.
We will, yes.
So if any planning board members have any questions for the applicant, now is the time to ask them.
Do you have any plans to enclose it over time?
Not currently, but it's a possibility in the future. If so, we actually spoke with Mark about it, and he said we would just need to go through the planning board again, which is fun.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. How far is the building from the adjacent greenhouse?
That's a good question. It's about 20 feet
20 feet.
parallel. Yes.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let me just follow up on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The zoning bylaws say 20 feet between principal buildings and accessory buildings, and it's mainly for fire safety.
Okay. Yep.
And so when you say approximately 20 feet,
Got it.
it's really just,
Be exact.
again, for fire safety.
Yep.
And what you might do is maybe just for your own benefit, maybe check in with the fire marshal and just
Okay.
see if he
Yeah.
feels it's okay for
Okay.
emergency access.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Are you proposing any lighting in the facility?
No.
Okay.
We will have electrical
Yeah.
for outlets, but no lighting, because it'll be open air. So,
Okay.
and I'd rather not stay up late at night. We're already there long enough.
So you won't really be using this pavilion during the winter months? You
No,
close
exactly,
down,
yeah.
So it's just really for, and it's
For the
only,
during
it's
the
not
season.
for the public either?
Correct.
It's just, yeah.
Yep, just for workers.
And it may say it in the application here, but it's on a raised concrete pad?
Yes, that's the proposal.
I'm going to make a motion that we vote for the Iron Ox Farm to construct a 24 by 36-foot open-air structure to support their agricultural operations at 656 Asbury Street.
Do I have,
Make sure no one from the public wants to comment.
oh, right. Anyone here objecting to Iron Ox Farm's application? I think everyone supports your application.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I think everyone really loves to have Iron Ox
I'm
Farm
gonna
on
I'm
Asbury
waiting
Street.
for
I
her.
certainly do.
I'll
really
second that
kind.
motion.
Okay, and also that you love to have Iron Ox Farm on
And
Asbury Street.
I second that comment, so I second both things.
Okay, so you're all set. So
Thank you.
when I call your name, please indicate that you approve this site plan application as articulated by Darcy. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Her, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. Good luck to you.
Thank you so much.
Hope you have a good summer.
Thank you, have a good night.
All right. The final item on our agenda is the public hearing on the Hamilton zoning bylaw proposed amendments, specifically the 3A overlay district and the, I'm going to get the name correct here, the Hamilton Town Center base zoning. So Mark, would you please read the public notice relative to the public hearing that we're opening this evening?
Sure. Notice of public hearing. Notice is hereby provided that the Hamilton Planning Board will conduct a public hearing pursuant to Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 5, for consideration of proposed amendments to Hamilton zoning bylaw on Tuesday, May 20th, 2025, at 7 p.m. at the Hamilton Wyndham Public Library, 14 Union Street in Hamilton, Mass. Members of the public are invited to provide comments on the amendments under consideration, which include the proposed rezoning of parcels in the town center downtown area of Hamilton and its immediate surroundings, either the existing business or R1A district designations to one of 5 proposed new town center zoning districts, including the proposed square mixed use, Bay Road mixed use, Willow Street mixed use, downtown residential, and Bay Road civic district, the proposed elimination of the business district, and the Willow Street overlay district. Parcels on Linden Street are also proposed to be rezoned from the business district to the R1A district. Additionally, 1 new multifamily Canterbrook Lane. The purpose of the proposed amendments is to both promote more contextual forms of development in the town center with enhanced site and design standards, and to meet the multifamily zoning requirements of the MBTA Communities Act, Mass General Law 40, Section 3A, and associated regulations. Remote electronic login access via Zoom will be provided as a courtesy. However, the meeting will not be terminated in the event that the technological issues disrupt the Zoom broadcast. Login information will be included on the posted planning board meeting agenda. The full text of the proposed zoning bylaw amendments and associated maps can be reviewed at the town clerk's office, located at Patton Homestead, during regular business hours or by visiting the Hamilton Planning Board webpage.
Thank you. So I see that representatives of UTIL are here. Welcome. Did you want to make any comments, Matt, before we dive into this public hearing?
I just have a presentation to share, perhaps.
I think that's a good idea. We'll start with that.
Okay.
Marty, while they're getting that kicked off, I wasn't able to attend the select board hearing last night, and I know there was a memo prepared, and I guess I wasn't aware of how that landed, or what our direction
That's a
were,
good question before.
or what our
we start.
direction was from the
So,
select board.
so we did present to the select board the consensus of the planning board that the matters that we have in front of us would benefit from a continuance for a variety of reasons. I mean, our time frame now is very short. I mean, this is the public hearing. We do not have final documents, and our next meeting is on June 3rd, at which point we have to make our report and recommendation for purposes of the warrant articles. We don't have warrant articles right now. The select board had a lot of questions, and what they decided to do was to open the warrant and continue the matter to their next meeting, which I believe is
June 2nd.
June 2nd.
June 2nd. So the warrant is still open
The warrant is still open,
until
so
June 2nd.
this, most members of the select board were determined to keep to this 2-track of potentially commencing litigation against the Commonwealth with respect to the metrics set forth in the regulations issued by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, and going forward with a vote on June 26th. So a final decision has not been made, and I think it will depend in large part about resolving many of the outstanding matters that we'll discuss after Matt's presentation.
Thank you.
Control L, are you
I normally give Emil a hard time. This one has 52.
You're exceeding
this one has 52.
You can have somebody else to harass now? Is that what you said?
I'm sorry, maybe I shouldn't give Emil such a hard time.
20 minutes.
that was a kind of an inside joke among the planning board. Emil has a reputation for having large slide decks.
Okay.
We appreciate his thoroughness. How about that? Let's spin it well.
They're very informative.
Right, and I have the reputation
appreciate
for writing really long memos, so excuse the levity, okay? Go ahead, Matt.
Okay. What I'd like to go over today is what you see here is a quick presentation of where we are in the timeline and the process. I want to also, because we're recapping things and there's probably always perhaps some new folks in the audience, set some broad parameters about how the zoning is actually going to work. And then a sort of brief overview of the two zoning, how they relate to the 3A requirements, and specifically some new material related to some analysis of how the existing zoning works or doesn't work. And then I've, at the end, reserved, I know there's still some issues that are of concern to the planning board, so I've sort of singled them out and hoping that we can discuss those then. Okay, so we are in the final, I'm a little bit blocked there on the screen, Mark, but that's okay. We're in the final innings of the final code. I believe we've issued 3 drafts. We are continuing to refine that draft with input from town council, town planners, ongoing feedback from this board, and getting closer, as they say, to making smaller and smaller sort of changes and edits and cleaning up. I believe our goal is to get you a sort of more final, the one that will go into the warrant by May 27th, so that you can review it in time for either is it June 2nd or a June 3rd?
June 3rd, or June 3rd meeting,
June
yes.
3rd meeting. So that is where we are. And in light of the fact that May 27th and June 3rd are coming soon, I wanted to foreground in this meeting some of those issues that I feel like are important, outstanding ones, and not small clerical ones. And there it is. So here we are at May 20th. And I understand that you spoke with the select board last night. So,
Yes.
that's part of the conversation today as well. Okay, I wanted to back up a little bit again to contextualize zoning for maybe a broader audience, some of whom might be here for the first time. And to clarify that zoning really is only a set of rules about what might be developed as by right, but it is not the only set of rules. There are other factors and regulations that come into play. Obviously, economic feasibility is a huge portion, whether something is worth building or not. But the zoning doesn't do away with any of the environmental permitting requirements. That's sewer, septic, all those things. Wetlands permitting, all of those things are still, have to be overcome. The building code remains untouched. Issues of life safety, structural integrity, all the things that the building code covers all have to be met again independently. And then for many of the parcels and the scale of projects that we're looking at, site plan review will still be in force. So there is still a level of review to ensure that the way projects are executed are consistent with the surroundings. When a project is as of right, site plan review can't reject it out of hand, but it can provide guidance on how certain things are treated, such as vehicular access, certain aspects of the design, traffic impacts, all those sorts of things. A question that's come up a lot, and one we thought we would just clarify. This new zoning, particularly the two new districts, rely on a metric which is called floor area ratio. It's very common in many zoning codes, but it hasn't been used in Hamilton. We've chosen to use it because it, when combined with some of the more design-focused sort of metrics and strategies that we've deployed, it is both very certain about capping the scale of the overall development while also providing some flexibility. It's also a very easy metric to translate into compliance. It's kind of very black and white in terms of compliance with the MBTA communities law. So it's a kind of cornerstone a little bit about how we are regulating the scale of overall development. In a nutshell, it's the ratio of the total floor areas of a development, whether that's in one building or more, to the total lot area. So you'll see in the upper left, if you had a one-story building that completely covered your entire lot, that would be a floor area ratio of 1, right? Where the total floor area of the building equals the total lot area. You can also achieve a floor area of 1 if you cover only half of your parcel, but you're 2 stories, right? And then a 3-story building that only covered a third of the parcel, also an FAR of 1. So that's how the sort of math works. And you can see in the bottom half, you can see what an FAR of 0.5 looks like. It's either half the lot at 1 story, a quarter of the lot at 2, or 17% of the lot at 3 stories. Some of the FARs that we're considering for the downtown area are more in the order of 0.4, 0.45, maybe even a little bit less than 0.4 in some sub-districts. The one sort of nuance that applies to Hamilton is that in our new districts, we have, I think almost, for the most part, typically are requiring a maximum height of 2.5 stories. And so once you're calculating floor areas relative to the lot area, there's always a question about how you calculate a half story. And there are different ways to do this. You have to set up rules. In the case of Hamilton, what we've decided is that the half story, there is a definition of a half story in the new code, which says that basically it's a pitched roof structure in which the total length of the dormers do not exceed 50% of the length of the roof, right? And that's a kind of nice, simple guide that gives you that half-story appearance. And the way we've written the code is that as long as you meet that metric, that top floor is considered a half a story for the purposes of doing the math.
I think we've also talked, just to, sorry to interrupt you. but
Yeah.
We've also, since you're on the floor area ratio, I think there was some back and forth that we've maybe batted around a little bit on that, applying that to a half-acre lot. And what that means in the size of a building that you could construct by right on a half-acre lot. Since it is, you know, you've explained, it's pretty straight math, and the acre being 43,000 something odd
Yep.
square feet, half for that and 0.45 of that, that's
Yep.
9,800 square feet. I think I just want to make that math clear to everyone, and the algebra that's being applied for the floor area ratios for a half-acre lot is a 9,800 square foot building.
If that's how the math works out. Is that a 0.4?
0.45.
0.45, which applies to, I think, is it Willow Street?
0.4 would be like, well, any half-acre lot in
That's-
those districts that you've applied the 0.45.
So in some sub-districts, we're at 0.4,
Yeah, so that's
maybe
like
even
8.
0.39, and some were at 0.45.
So it's between 8,000 and
Yes.
9,800 square. It's 8,800,
10,000.
8,600 square feet or 9,800.
And that's, and that's total, so if you
Total, yeah.
have 2 stories, you
That's right.
divide it in half, so the footprint is half.
And the average home being about 2,000,
Yeah,
also more than one story usually.
right.
Just to give it a context. I'm not saying it's good or bad, just it's good context to give to the same,
Yes,
floor area ratio explanation that you're having.
okay. Also, just a question that always comes up, because this was a process that looked at the downtown holistically initially. Zoning as a tool traditionally regulates what happens on private property. It is not a tool that tells the town where to put crosswalks or how to design intersections, or how to partition the right-of-way in terms of the lanes and that sort of thing. It typically controls development that happens on private property beyond that right-of-way. That said, there are very important elements to the code that deal with that important intersection between the public and the private. So we've incorporated some guidance on how to design, for instance, curb cuts, which is a traditional sort of location where those two things come together. And of course, we've put in design guidelines and other things that obviously affect how those front-facing, public realm-facing front yards appear, what types of plantings may be allowed or required in those sorts of conditions. This is a map of the current zoning. There's really, in the downtown, there are really only 2 zones, R1A, which is that sort of orange, and then the business district that's represented in purple. You're probably familiar that your current business district hosts a variety of different uses, from single-family homes to sort of traditional shops to shopping centers. R1A is, for the most part, residential, as it suggests. And we'll see in a moment that one thing that's a little bit different is that the size of the typical parcels downtown are much smaller than the minimum that your current zoning allows, which is 20,000 square feet. Another big question that's come up is, how does this apply to existing buildings that might have either non-conforming uses or whose structures or lot areas are non-conforming? The way that we've crafted this code with respect to uses, essentially there are no changes to your current code. These issues are typically handled in Section 5. There's already a big portion of the code devoted to these sorts of situations. The sort of expansion or change of a non-conforming use really has to go to the ZBA for any kind of permit. We haven't changed that or touched that at all. Non-conforming structures, let's say you're on a non-conforming lot, or your building encroaches on a required yard. We have not made any changes to those, but we have provided some clarity. Your current code indicates the circumstances under which, as long as you're not making a nonconformity worse, that you can proceed to get a building permit. And there are these exceptions that apply specifically and only to single and two-family structures. The gist of it is, if you have a single-family structure on a conforming lot, but maybe your side yard is too small, the code is written right now so that you can go for a building permit, let's say, to put an addition on, so long as that non-conforming side yard isn't made worse. That's the gist of it. The language is fairly long and technical, but that's the gist of the zoning that is in place now. The spirit of it, I believe, was to capture all those parcels that are essentially sort of non-conforming for one reason or another. What we've done is to add additional language in the downtown zoning to capture not just the side yards or the other sorts of setbacks as nonconformities, but all the other dimensional metrics that we've introduced as part of this form-based inspired code. So this might include both minimum and maximum front setbacks, minimum floor-to-floor heights, building frontage minimums. We've introduced a lot of additional dimensional requirements. And so what we've done is to essentially extend some of those exceptions to those particular conditions. So for instance, if you're in the Willow Street mixed-use district and your existing ground floor to the second floor is less than 13 feet, you won't get completely tripped up if you want to put a dormer on the back of your house or something, right? The idea is to not overburden existing structures with this new set of rules, but to allow them the way that they currently are in your zoning. New construction obviously has to conform entirely to the new zoning, but the spirit of what we've added here is to sort of continue how nonconformities are addressed in your current code. So a brief summary of the proposed overall zoning compliance approach. Again, we presented this before, but this being a public hearing, there may be new people here. The new zoning consists of two pieces. There's the town center zoning, which consists of 5 separate sub-districts. And then there is an overlay district on Asbury Street that we're calling the 3A Multifamily Overlay District. The overlay district, the 3A Multifamily Overlay District, in conjunction with 3 of the 5 town center sub-districts, together provide the compliance, the metrics, the numbers that are required to comply with 3A. Depot Square, which is sort of like more of a business-oriented district, and the Bay Road Civic, which is more of a publicly owned parcel. Those two are sort of outside the requirements of 3A. I will also say that the town center zoning will replace the zoning that is currently in place in those locations, whereas the overlay is just kind of superimposition of another way of getting multifamily housing permitted. This is the 3A multifamily district. It is consists of 2 parcels on, I guess it's Asbury Street. It's approximately 19 acres. It consists of 1 parcel that has an existing 23-unit, I believe, condominium development, and then another adjacent parcel where I think approximately 45-unit 40B project has recently been permitted and is now being executed. In the town center, a very quick sort of summary and recap of where we started. With the help of the committee that we were working with, we began to think about the importance of thinking about the downtown, not just in terms of total area, but in terms of the particular qualities of the streets and the frontages that are in the district. So there's Bay Road, we're calling the Bay Road Scenic Corridor, the historic Village Center, which is characterized by Railroad Avenue. There's the sort of the eastern side of Willow Street, which has sort of currently a mixed-use character, and then this sort of more traditionally single-family residential character along Willow. And then for sort of longer-term planning processes, thinking a little bit about possible future green connections on the old railway right-of-way. These sorts of frontages informed how we thought about what development could and should look like in certain areas, and so we worked from the public realm back to think about how we might, in some cases, like Railroad Avenue, think about more closely matching that existing sort of nice, sort of traditional storefront pattern to doing something maybe a little bit more engaging and different, let's say, on Willow Street, for instance, where you have all kinds of dissonant uses currently. How could we think about imagining a more coherent and pedestrian-friendly set of ground floor uses? And then Bay Road Scenic Corridor, again, is maybe more along the lines of preserving what's there as well as in the downtown residential. So those frontage types essentially translated into this map of subdistricts that I'm showing you here. We have 5 subdistricts. 3 of them, the Bay Road mixed use, the Willow Street mixed use, and the downtown residential, together, you see they're outlined in a black line, together contribute to the requirements of 3A. Bay Road Civic is a town-owned parcel that is outside of the requirements of 3A, as is your sort of traditional commercial center, which we're calling calling a Depot Square mixed use. And it consists of that portion of Railroad Ave, as well as the shopping center and the area around the commuter rail. These are 3 sort of hypothetical development images that might be typical to each of these subdistricts. Bay Road mixed use consists of more formally fronting buildings that appear to have more of a residential character, but in cases might host other sorts of mixed use or sort of small commercial uses. Willow Street mixed use, much larger lots, particularly to the north, an image of providing some sort of active uses, but also supporting other forms of residential uses. And then downtown residential, really trying to come close to mimicking or repeating some of the patterns and the character of that portion of the downtown in that location. The Depot Square Mixed Use District and the Bay Road Civic, again, are outside of the requirements of 3A. An important part of the Depot Square was taking the character and the scale of the buildings we see on Railroad Avenue and beginning to imagine how those might be possible in other locations in such a way that they would maybe produce a more pedestrian-friendly and less car-centric kind of frontage, and to think very clearly about important connections and view corridors as they relate to certain very big parcels and your sort of older fabric. Bay Road Civic is a sort of one-off town-owned parcel. The zoning is really provided for sort of guidance, but one of the important features was to ensure that if there's any future building on there, that at least there is a record of the desire that, that the frontage of that continue some of the patterns and the qualities that we are trying to promote in the sort of the very defining front yards of Bay Road. As a town-owned parcel, changes of use and new development or additional development would have to go, obviously, I think, before town meeting or other more public sort of decision-making. So the zoning has maybe less direct controlling applicability as it would on a private parcel, but it was important to sort of make a record of what was desired, and particularly if the parcel was disposed of for any reason.
Can you guys collapse that so we can see the corner, the Mark Connors column?
We can't see.
I can try.
Or put a
Right at the top of the temple,
A little on the left. That,
The little minus sign.
and collapse it.
There you go.
thank you. Okay, we've done some additional analysis to show a little bit about how your existing zoning is applying to the downtown district. I wonder, Mark, yeah, hit the,
If you hit
Behind
the
the
little-
sign,
Yeah, the
it's a
top,
negative
the
sign.
top little,
Oh, I see.
that little minimize.
right there.
Chase us all.
There we go. Thank you.
Then you can move it.
To see how your R1A district is really applying to the existing sort of fabric in the downtown, we looked at a sort of test parcel for minimum lot area, minimum lot frontage, and the maximum building lot coverage. I think you're in Zoom. Maybe if you
We'll click back on the slide.
tap, there we go.
Somebody said that, yeah.
Yep. It should be noted, and I think it's been noted here before, that the underlying zoning doesn't matches only 25% of the existing parcels. So everything in red here is non-conforming, at least for lot size, if not for other things as well. But that was the one metric that we sort of looked at to generate this. So you can see, particularly in these areas that have a fairly consistent smaller lot pattern, and then even in part of the business district as well. And if we look in and what that really means, this is we picked a nice sample plot. This is actually a larger than average downtown plot, but yet it's still not conforming in terms of its minimum lot size. It's about 19,000 square feet. 20,000 square feet looks a little bit like that. And as well, it is non-conforming because it doesn't have enough width on the street. Its frontage is only 83 feet. It needs to be 125 feet to conform. And so very quickly, a lot of the downtown is caught up in a kind of situation where they're already non-conforming, having been there for quite a while. I'd say one area it is conforming is in the maximum building lot coverage percentage. Obviously, it has a smaller footprint. The underlying zoning allows up to 25%, which is actually quite large. Almost, upwards of 4,500 square feet is a very, very large building. So it's a quick snapshot to see that the current zoning is really not reflective of what's there. What our big intention was with the new zoning was to craft rules that much more closely resemble the character and the scale of the buildings that are there, with something that looks like this. In the business district, it's a little bit funnier. There's a lot of, you can see that in the business district, a lot of things get sort of bumped up the line. But one of the rules in the business district is that if you have a single residential unit, the minimum lot area is 20,000 square feet. Even though this parcel is very large, it is still not conforming. It's also not conforming because it only has 80 feet to frontage, even though that's a very typical kind of cadence for Bay Road. So you can see how wide that would have to be. I think where it maybe is conforming is that this one has a slightly larger footprint. It's about 9,000 square feet. Business district allows you up to 75%, or as determined during site plan review. So probably there's some discretion there. But that's what 75% looks like. We're making the case a little bit that the new zoning may not be perfect, but we think it's probably appropriate to point out that the current zoning is not sort of reflecting the current underlying sort of character of of the street. This is a little bit more what the new zoning is attempting to accomplish, which is strongly defined front yards, a certain scale of building that is, again, consistent with some of the traditional types of fabric you have along Bay Road. Okay, I wanted to sort of quickly bring up some issues that I know are still under discussion and are still concerns, particularly with this board. Two of them really have to do with sort of ongoing, sort of looking at the use table. I know that we have, per a lot of the recommendations, requests we've received so far, we've begun to change some of those uses. I think there's been a more recent question that's come up, which is who the special permit granting authority should be. If you look at your current use table now, you have 3 of them. You have the Select Board, the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the Planning Board. That's another question that, obviously we as consultants on this particular scope are not prepared to sort of do for you, but I wanted to put that up front if that's something that you all wanted to change for this final draft. And then I'm happy to talk again additionally about applicability and sort of the nonconformities, because I know that that was also a concern. We can incorporate a lot of these changes, particularly if there are additional changes that are requested for the use table, the special permit granting authority, if there are changes that you believe that we should make relative to non-conforming uses and structures, we can do that. My ask would be that those changes be specific and the asks be specific, and we can sort of certainly incorporate those things to the extent that that's feasible within the limited time frame that we have. The other thing that I think we've been asked by the town to do, not for May 27th, but perhaps for later, maybe for June 3rd, is to prepare some sort of, obviously there's a lot of information about this process online, but to prepare a kind of a fact sheet or something that can be distributed maybe more easily to help people, to guide people to understand what the new zoning is proposing. And I'll take questions or comments.
Well, at our May 13th meeting, we did discuss the table of use regulations, and the planning board did feel that it should be the entity that determined issues in these new districts. So just the change would only apply to the 5 downtown districts. And then the other thing that we did talk about, and it's in the draft of May 6th, there were an indication that kennels would be permitted in 3 of the districts, Depot Square, Bay Road mixed use, and Willow Street mixed use. And the planning board didn't think that was an appropriate use in those areas, primarily because of the noise associated with kennels. So oftentimes the dogs bark pretty loudly. And obviously the Willow Street mixed use is abutting a residential area. Also, with respect to the motor vehicle light service station, it was permitted with the ZBA's approval in the Depot Square, and the planning board was of the opinion that another service station in the downtown was unwarranted. We have 2 already, the Cumberland Farms, and then the service station, which might actually be in Wenham, but allowing another one seems almost absurd, given what we want to accomplish here with our downtown. And I think that was the extent of it. It was primarily to take out the ZBA and replace the ZBA with the planning board,
So for the new districts
or
specifically.
just the new
Yep.
districts.
And I just want to say, I've told this board, and I just tell the public that for a little background, that because so many of the uses on the use table are commercial, just when you list them all out,
Right.
they disproportionately sort of impact this obviously the downtown area. We, as a starting point, tried to keep things as they were. So if something was in the business district and it was allowed by special permit of some sort, we started that default. And I understand that this process has maybe gotten us to look more carefully at what's been sitting there.
Right, right.
And so we're happy to make those changes. They don't seem very, onerous.
Right. I think the other most significant discussion point that we had at our last meeting was about the applicability section. That would be 9.8.1 H. And I think the consensus was that this was difficult to follow. It would be particularly difficult, I think, for a property owner. I know that Emil and Jonathan were able to evaluate this provision and explicate its potential shortfalls, and I would defer to them to articulate their views. But I looked at it, and it wasn't crystal clear to me how this would work in practice if I were a property owner and I wanted to do something to my house. It seemed very convoluted, and we talked more about simplifying it, and I will then turn this over to Jonathan, who really made some excellent points, if you'd be so kind.
Well, it's helpful, I think, to break it down into two sort of subjects. One is the clarity of the language, and that's more of a technical issue, a clerical issue. And then a larger substantive issue, I feel, is that I really appreciate the non-conforming itemization of where you would be able to continue the use of something. And it's comprehensive. I think it covers all of the new metrics, as you mentioned. And my concern would be, if you had a property where a number of these things came into play, let's say front yard, the building was too far away from the street, the parking was right on the street, things like that. So say 2, 3, 4 of these nonconformities occurred, then combine that with a significant redevelopment of that property, but not a tear down. So pieces of the existing building remain, so that the building footprint is grandfathered in, but is completely, redeveloped. And then it's added to, and still doesn't exceed the metrics, but it's got, let me just paint a quick picture of what could happen, and there are places where this could happen specifically on both Bay Road and on Willow Street. You have, the goal with the form-based code is to get the parking off the street and make it pedestrian-friendly and safe, so people aren't backing into sidewalks and things like that. So the concern would be, if you aggregated some of these nonconformities into, exceptions, and then you redevelop the property, there's no trigger to say, well, that's a lot of redevelopment. You've made the building a lot bigger. You've increased the parking, but you haven't increased the nonconformity. There's, you haven't changed the parking spaces that are right on the sidewalk, but you've gone further back, so now you've got a bigger parking lot in total. Maybe it went from 4 spaces to 15 spaces, but they're all on the street. The building got bigger, maybe it exceeded the unbroken frontage. So now you've got a big block of a building, which people have really expressed as their worst fear. You know, you've got the appearance of a big block of a building filled with parking in the front, and there's no aggregate trigger to bring in the form-based code. And I think there's plenty of precedent that we don't really have to reinvent in building codes, in FEMA regulations, and things like that, where it's some degree of monetary investment. Often it's 50%, more than 50% of the market value. And I think it would be helpful to have some kind of a trigger in here so that we don't accidentally promote things that the town is concerned about, you know, that we're trying to protect against. We're trying to protect ourselves against, you know, undesirable aspects of, say, 3A. So that's my question.
Yeah, so by redevelopment, I presume you mean redevelopment of a single into maybe 3 families?
Or a business into a small business into a larger business.
Yeah.
You know, building into a larger building, addition out back.
So
That kind of
these
thing.
exceptions apply only to 1 and 2 families?
Well, you've also got it in the Depot Square district.
Yeah, the Depot Square District is a different set of rules. It was intended so that, let's say, some of those traditional storefronts on Railroad Avenue, if they wanted to do a renovation or make an addition or something, that they wouldn't get caught up in having too little fenestration, right? Or any of those sorts of other things. So it's calibrated, it's a different set of, it's meant to enable those more traditional commercial structures to do reasonable things to make alterations, but it was not a sort of an escape hatch. On the residential side, like your current code, section 5, these exceptions, if you want to call them that, are limited to 1 and 2 family only. So if someone wants to go from a single family to a 3 family, it would trigger the whole new code in terms of the parking, setbacks, everything. I think there are ways to, there are probably properties that can do this without addressing any kind of nonconformities because they might not have them, particularly because lot sizes now are going to be more sort of right-sized. But I'm happy to look more thoroughly at the Depot Square portion of this. But that was our intent with how that was crafted.
Yeah, I understand that. And I guess what I'm just looking for is to make sure that there's not accidentally an end-around situation where you're, you know, the aggregation of these exceptions creates something that the town really isn't looking for. So.
Yeah, it doesn't allow you to aggregate them. It's simply saying that, again, for 1 and 2 families, if you have these nonconformities, you can do things so long as you are not making them worse.
And that's the other confusion with the language is, let's say the parking, you know, setbacks. So, for example, the form-based code tends to say, hold the street. If you're too far back, come closer. Whereas the exceptions to the nonconformity say if you're not coming closer to the street, if you're going further away, you have
I see.
an exception. So now you're building greater and greater mass further away from the street and maybe even leaving the parking out in front because it's got an exception. And the goal is not to create larger blocks of buildings that don't honor the frontage consistencies. So by aggregating, what I mean is when you accidentally have a number of these nonconformities as exceptions, do they inadvertently create patterns that we're actually trying to guide back toward what the desirable patterns are? So, and I haven't looked at every case, but that's sort of the test drive, piece of it. So I
Yeah.
guess the question would be, is it worth looking at this to see if there's some sort of a larger trigger so that folks can't
Okay.
either intentionally or accidentally do an end around?
Yeah, there is a, I think, and it still applies in the base code, section 5, I think it's increasing size by more than 100%. That's the one sort of trigger that's universal right now. We could look at additional triggers.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, I'm less, there are scenarios like you're imagining that are maybe hypothetically possible. I'm generally not totally concerned because there is, within the parameters of the code, there's a lot of compliance already. In other words, there are some pretty well-established patterns about front yards and depths, and the metrics in the code sort of reflect that. I agree it might get trickier with parking in the front. If somebody's got a little parking space in their front yard, right off to the side. Does that invite, I mean, it wouldn't allow you to put more, for instance.
Well, if you go further back, it seems like you could. In other words, you don't go, if you don't make it more non-conforming, okay, so I'm not coming further forward, and I'm not adding any along there. I've already got 4 spaces right on the sidewalk with no sidewalk defined, and now I make 8 more spaces right adjacent to that, moving back, and I'm not making it non-conforming.
So the reason that there's such a long list is because the wording has to be very precise.
Understood.
If you read carefully, the wording around the parking says, so long as if there's non-conforming parking, so long as the parking isn't changed.
Right, so the question is, if you don't change those 4 spaces that are right on the sidewalk,
Put conforming ones behind.
you bet.
Got it.
Yes, that's my concern. And we've
Okay.
got that. And it's really a safety issue, and it's really antithetical to what we're trying to accomplish here. And this, my concern is it doesn't really address that. In fact, it promotes more of it. Bigger chunks of that.
I don't know if it promotes more of it, but I can understand your concern about how we set up more triggers.
Yeah, and I think you don't have to undo what you've got here, but it's putting a little bit of an umbrella on it so that it can't get out of control. And I don't know exactly what that is. I'm just trying to point to examples of where there are standardized, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. There are standardized triggers where somebody can't redevelop a whole property and do that. And the concern that I have is often, if you take a building shell and you gut it, and you've completely redeveloped, now it's basically a new building, even though it's an existing building shell, the existing building footprint. And now for the next 30 years, that thing isn't going to change because it's basically been completely redeveloped, but it's all grandfathered in. And so you've sort of calcified the wrong pattern.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, though.
I understand.
Right?
So-
Is anyone who wants to put a new dormer on their roof, are they going to be required to elevate their second floor?
No, because that wouldn't, the idea would be you'd create an umbrella that doesn't trigger that. If use the 50% market value trigger, and
Right.
somebody puts even 5 dormers on, and redoes their parking, it's not going to trigger it. But if they gut the building, put a giant addition on the back, double the size of the parking, that's probably going to exceed that 50% of the market value, and then you can at least then rein in the patterns.
So that might be the best way to do this, because I don't know if we can disentangle all the separate things, but I think a threshold, a monetary threshold or an area threshold, there already is an area threshold, but
Yep.
adding that, I think, is the simplest thing, with the option there's always the option to go for a special permit
Yeah.
and there's explicit language in there that says this is not to deter or prohibit reasonable things from happening.
And I think
Right.
that's one of Emil's points is give people a safety valve. So if a great proposal comes in that does violate the letter of the law of the metrics, but it's really a great proposal and good for the town, give that applicant an opportunity to present it and have success.
Yeah.
So I'm in favor of that as
Okay.
well. So I think I've communicated what
Yep.
the concerns are. And I think you don't have to undo anything. You can just add something that's not that complicated.
I think that makes sense.
Thank you.
Could I just add another point here? And that is the structure of this section, and I'll get to this at the end. I have some issues with the formatting and the numbering. But here, with these non-conforming structures, I think that it really has to be broken down better so that the heading is, itemizes the fact that it's non-conforming single and two-family dwelling structures. So that's a separate section with information underneath it. And Depot Square then would also be another heading, if you will, with information underneath it. And that point, that gets to, what about all the other buildings that there might be businesses or whatever? What is the trigger for them? They're not in Depot Square, they're on Willow Street. So what happens then? So that goes to Jonathan's point as well. So we're dealing now with one and two family structures and structures in Depot Square, but what about all the other structures? What can they do and what triggers the need for them to be in compliance?
That's where some sort of an umbrella trigger for applicability, I think, would be useful, where that covers essentially all of the zones, come up with something, that covers all of them and doesn't require you to undo any of the things you've already engineered into
Well,
this.
hold on, the nonconformity language, again, it derives from your section 5, which was an escape hatch from overly burdensome, too much nonconformity that was existing. It was very limited to 1 and 2 families. Once you're into commercial uses, mixed uses, multifamily uses, the trigger is anything. Anytime that you're doing a modification, right? You could modify something that is already conforming, and you modify it in a way that still conforms, but you're already into the new zoning. By default, there isn't some sort of excuse or the trigger is that the zoning is in place, and it becomes the measure against which both new development and alterations or extensions or additions get sort of
Okay.
evaluated.
And with all that being said, I think that if it's set forth in an outline format, the way you just articulated, it would be much easier for people to understand. And the language, it seems to confound, it confounds me, but if it was set up in an outline form, the way you just said, a little more clearly, I think it would help the public at large understand exactly what you just said. So we're dealing with single and two-family houses and Depot Square, and then everything else that has to comply with the new code. That should be, if you've said it, it doesn't stick out quite enough. It's not
No, it's not clear.
It's not clear.
Well, it is,
It's
how the
probably,
zoning works,
well,
right?
it's probably in there, but
No,
when you're
it doesn't, there-
talking with applicability and whatnot, that's where it should be crystal clear. So you read it and you get it.
there's a whole host of things that don't need to be made explicit within a given section of the code. In fact, town council is already crossing things out, saying you don't need to say this because it's already covered somewhere else. I think what might be more constructive is in the materials, either on the website or in the materials that we are planning to distribute, that we simply explain this in simple terms. It's very difficult. The nonconformity language in your, in section 5 is quite precise and technical. This additional language has to follow that because you need very particular kinds of language to give the plan reviewer enough direction, right? But it is the nature of zoning that it applies, and that there are only a certain limited number of situations where existing nonconformities would be allowed to continue in the case that somebody wanted to do an addition or an alteration.
Just for clarification, maybe you can answer this. If you were to have a building that was set further back than the code says, it's non-conforming in setback, and the owner of the property decides to build another building or two buildings, would he be required to reduce that nonconformance? In other words, if you were to put a new building, would have to then comply with the setback? In other words, the 0 to 10 feet or so. Yeah, this sort of thing that could be really handled easily, I think, with a couple of simple sketches would really explain a lot, I think. If your building was non-conforming and you wanted to put an addition on the front of it, do you have to start at the building line and go back to where the building is? Or if you want to build on the side, do you have to make the facade percentage, you have to satisfy that of 60% or whatever it is for that particular street? Do you have to satisfy that before you can build behind? So the sequencing of where you can put an addition on should be a lot clearer to my mind. And in a way, if you can do it by sketches, I think that's easier. But because the language is just, we get a lot of double, triple negatives, and it seems, and it's hard to kind of fathom.
Yeah, you're talking about the sequencing of things. In the case of, let's say,
Is the goal to make it more conforming throughout the town? Is that really the goal of the form-based code, to bring in conformance over a period of time?
again, if you're doing
The
anything.
question of how quickly do you want to do that? Do you want to do it sooner or a lot later or
If you're,
whenever?
if you're doing anything significant or doing anything that has 3 units or more, you are either building to the new code,
Yeah.
or you're coming before either this board or the ZBA to get an exception, period. And that's where those conversations would take place, right? Well, I see you're adding, you're not going over the setback, but if you added a little bit more in that dimension, you'd meet these other requirements, right? Or if you're adding, why don't you add in the front to meet the minimum, right?
Right.
I don't know if, this is really limited, again, the intent of this was so that your average homeowner, and I say 1 and 2 families, most of them are 1 families, doesn't get stuck when they want to do something simple, right? But virtually everything else would have to conform or go before this board or another board. And I think that would be the more useful place for those conversations to happen. Because I don't think, if we were to like deal with every single possible eventuality in the language, it would.
What was not clear to me was that all buildings within, other than residential 1 and 2 family dwellings, I thought it was not clear to me to what extent did that apply to buildings in mixed use, for example, if the buildings were residential in the mixed use district. It would only apply to those buildings that are 1 and 2 family dwellings?
Only applies to 1 and 2 families.
So they could be in those districts. If they're 1 and 2 family, they have to comply with those standards. And
Yes. Well, no.
they would be new buildings, so they would have to comply anyway. So that's the exception to the 1 and 2 family dwelling. All new buildings would have to comply with the zoning regulation in the mixed use,
Yes.
even though they're 1 and 2 family dwellings. That again, is a little confusing. If you could somehow introduce the fact that 1 and 2 family dwellings is one category, the other is the mixed use, might be clearer.
Okay, I will add some language that sets those boundaries more explicitly.
Okay.
I think those boundaries they're in the language by the fact that it's only those types that get these nonconformity allowances. But we can make it explicit that other types of uses or mixed uses don't.
Or do by exception by special permit.
Yeah. So that's
Yep.
all there already.
I had a,
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Pat.
are we off? Are you through yours? I just had
Yeah.
one on materials.
I've got other things, but yeah, go ahead.
So the state rep, Tom Walsh, had indicated that we have some, in the building materials section of these codes and how we apply them, there's some opportunity there that the code allows, 3A compliance allows for promoting sustainable development. And I didn't feel like our form-based code took those opportunities when they could. And that's why I made some suggestions around avoiding red list chemicals, how you source materials, and the percentage in certain distance from the construction site, and maybe, some selection of a certain percentage of those materials being sourced sustainably through whatever means. Is there a reason why we didn't take that opportunity to promote sustainable development in the materials section?
My understanding is that 3A will not allow us to apply a very specific higher standard just to those districts.
But we don't have, I guess, this is where I think I was getting the recommendation from the state rep, in that in this instance, in the materials section, we do have an allowance to promote and even in some cases require certain sustainable sourced materials.
I think it's against the regs, basically, that the regs are written to discourage the use of special requirements like LEED certification or other kinds of higher standards to make it more difficult to develop. And requiring, Zoe, you might know more.
I'm looking it up now.
Okay.
I think that's where the subjectiveness comes in too, because to suggest that a more sustainable development in how you source materials is more difficult is also incorrect. It's actually oftentimes more beneficial and sometimes comes at a lower cost. Considering that, if you source materials closer to the job site, obviously you're not. So there's certain elements to, and in the long-term maintenance and whatnot that you consider otherwise. But I think that's where the rub oftentimes is the initial reaction that sustainable development is more difficult, more expensive, and harder to do, because it's oftentimes not.
Is it a requirement that you have in your zoning elsewhere?
I think that's the kicker, is you can do it, but it has to apply townwide. It can't be specific to the 3A district.
Maybe we should consider, this is
That
the
could be,
townwide form-based code, you know
yes,
what I mean?
that could be something that could be done as a modification in the future,
Yeah.
so.
Well, Matt's correct. I can't find the exact provision in the regulations, but I remember reading it and thinking, here are two policies in conflict. You have a state policy to promote energy conservation and this, that, and the other, but you can't mandate that in 3A housing. It just seems so counterintuitive and backward thinking in my mind. But it's true. But in that building materials section, I don't know if you could do what you suggest in the Depot Square district, because that's not 3A. It's not part of the 3A zoning, so there might be the potential to do it there.
You could. I would not recommend introducing it at this late
In the-
moment, but it's something that you could add, you could amend your zoning later to be more deliberate, have a little bit more of a process to understand how it would be implemented, how it would be regulated. Does your plan reviewer want to be looking up, carbon footprint charts and, there's a practical aspect to how it's enforced. That should be, it's not impossible, right? But it's something that should be considered in how you craft that. I will add that we do have some material requirements, mainly just for aesthetic purposes.
But I think Attorney Stein might have questioned some of those. We may have to look at those tonight.
She did, and we'll talk about it with her probably a little bit later this week, but we did speak with HLC earlier today, and they were not, they didn't raise it.
Then we'll let that be between you and Attorney Stein.
So I have the language of the regs here. I'm just gonna read it because this is
this is what we have to reference as much as you. We don't have any, sorry, I'll come to the mic for those that are online. I'm just gonna read out the section of the regs that addresses this issue about energy efficiency. It's
This
on.
isn't energy efficiency. Sorry. It's the comments I'm making have zero to do with energy efficiency.
Give me a second. You're really impatient right now. There's a section that is calling allowing multifamily housing as of right, defining a range of things that would be considered impeding as of right development. In that, there's a section that addresses site plan review, what is allowable within site plan review. There's a section that addresses affordability requirements. That's where all the inclusionary housing discussions come, the limits on that, how that can apply, how you can supersede that with an economic feasibility assessment. Then there is a section, other requirements that do not apply uniformly in the multifamily zoning district. Zoning will not be deemed compliant with Mass General Law, Chapter 40A, Section 3A's requirement that multifamily housing be allowed as of right if the zoning imposes requirements on multifamily housing that are not generally applicable to other uses. The following are examples. I'm providing an example. They didn't list the specific issues that you're describing. I think they would consider it to be among a similar set of issues. The following are examples of requirements that would be deemed to be inconsistent with the as of right use. One, a requirement that multifamily housing meet higher energy efficiency standards than other uses. Two, a requirement that a multifamily use achieve a third-party certification that is not required for other uses in the district. And three, a requirement that multifamily use must be combined with commercial or other uses on the same lot or as part of a single project, et cetera. It goes on to mixed use issues. So there is, I think the spirit of what you're hearing there is that they want to be sure that you're not imposing a requirement on 3A or multifamily specifically within 3A that would be issuing a requirement for that is a higher standard than what you're applying to other uses. And I think kind of by implication, the spirit is other districts. So I think that's where I would advise you, as Matthew has described, if this is something that's a priority for the town, which I commend you on, I agree. I think it should be addressed at the town-wide scale in a coordinated way with more time to discuss the specifics, including the administrative burden, whether that's a cost that your town is ready to prepare for, where you have the staff to support it, and what would be something that would match the economic viability of the projects that you want to see move forward in your town. So that's welcome to discuss further, but that's kind of what we have at this point, and we only have about a week to get to resolution.
Thank you.
Did anyone else have any comments? So we're aware that Robin Stein had extensive comments with respect to the May 6th draft, and you will meet with her and discuss her comments.
Yes.
And attempt to resolve them. We've talked about the deadline for providing the planning board with something much more final than what the document we now have by May 27th. So we have something to review on January 3rd. However, you know, we do have the issue of the actual warrant articles. I know that Joe Demilovitz at the select board meeting last night was contemplating 3 articles. One would be for the Asbury Street district, the multifamily district, and one would be for the 3A districts in the town center, and another would be for the Depot Square and the Bay Roast Civic, because those amendments would require 2/3 approval at town meeting, whereas all the 3A amendments only require a majority. So at this juncture, it's a little unclear to me as whether the planning board, and I think this is the case, but the planning board would have to issue its report and recommendation with respect to the actual warrant articles. And I think Robin has gone, you know, a long way in terms of trying to set that up. But that is something that we would need. So that's just one more kind of loose end.
Yep. With respect to splitting them up, I understand you've got to split up the non-3A districts, which are 2/3 versus the 3A districts that'll be simple majority. If possible, I don't know why the 3A districts, the overlay and the town center districts couldn't be combined as a single.
Well, the form-based code doesn't apply to the Asbury Street district, so that might be one of the reasons for that.
No, but they're two districts. They would get proposed as one package.
Well, that's something to discuss with Robin Stein.
Yes.
I mean, this is not something that I'm prepared to resolve tonight.
Yep.
Because, as I said, the town manager had a little handout that said 3 articles. You're suggesting 2. I don't have a resolution to that. That's just something that we need to discuss. So do any other planning board members have any particular comments here?
I just have a couple questions, not for you, but just for us, did the Carriage Lane, I know we had talked about reaching out to the people on Carriage Lane. Did that ever happen? Or is that in the process of happening to let them know that their zoning could be changing?
Not as of yet. We certainly could, but the question would be,
Because we talked about that, I thought we had said we would do it, so that's.
We did talk about it, so
Yeah.
maybe we can
but
resolve it.
I guess it feels a little uncomfortable to me to notify certain people, but not everyone in the district, so should we notify everyone in the districts?
The reason I think we were talking about that is it was residential people, and it was gonna be turned into mixed use, because Carriage Lane was that lane that we kept, are we gonna put it in the district or out of the district? And so it felt like for them, it could, if somebody buys a lot next to them and decides to develop it differently because the zoning's different, it felt like a material shift. So to me, it seemed a little bit more than just finding out a town meeting or maybe finding out about this hearing, but not really realizing their street is being changed.
Yeah, we
That's
can
one
certainly-
street. I don't know how many residents are on there.
It's not many. We could certainly do it this week, and they'd be notified in time. I believe this will likely be continued to June 3rd, so at least they'd have an opportunity to participate.
Right. And then the other question I have is just on the form-based code, or these articles. If the form-based code fails, can we not bring it back for 2 years? Or what is I know there's a 2-year thing with the zoning, so I just didn't know.
And the planning board has to, you can bring it back within 2 years. The planning board has to endorse it. So you need a majority of the planning board to support the next, if it fails one time, the second time, you need a majority of the board to support, and I think there has to be some, at least minor changes to the language.
Okay, so there has to be some kind of, you can't bring the exact same wording back, and then the planning board has to, okay. I just didn't know if that was a risk for us to try to push this through sooner without having the education
That is a
that we've
risk.
talked about.
That is an absolute risk. The
And
form-
usually, I know you talked about, that it's usually, we do the education on the front side, and I feel like there's so much distraction with other things happening in town that, I don't really feel like people are paying attention. So I wanted to understand what the risk was if we did bring it, if we were gonna be held back for 2 years.
Well, the town manager last night was saying that the 3A districts can be brought back to the town in much shorter length of time. Whether they have to be changed or not, I don't know. But Ipswich has done that, many towns have done that. The first
Right.
vote fails and the second one goes forward. So we'll put that aside as well.
Yes.
I mean, the select board has this basically on its agenda
Right.
for its next meeting. Now, with that said, I proofread the Hamilton Town Center-based zoning in the Hamilton 3A multifamily overlay district, and the planning board members here can attest that when it comes to proofreading, how would you characterize me?
Consistent.
Your worst enemy?
That's one way.
So I don't want to go through all the edits that I have made. I can make just a few comments. I would have to go through it and actually put them in some kind of a format that you could read. But I have notes all over the place, all over these documents. The first issue that I have, and I have it with both of these proposed zoning, is that the outlining doesn't follow the format of our existing zoning bylaw. So, for example, in our existing zoning bylaw, there's usually a 1 followed by A, B, C, and D, and A, B, and C, and D are not in parentheses. You use parentheses. And then following that, we default to Roman numerals. But anyhow, so that is one, large issue that really needs to be cleaned up. I found inconsistencies with capitalization. I will have to just probably do something red line for you. I can't go through everything. I think it would be unfair to our audience because they may want to have some comments. This is something that you could consider, but in 9.8.2, you essentially have definitions. They're not called definitions. I think there's, a concern of mine is that if there is a definition in section 11 of our zoning bylaw, that has to be clear. You do reference section 11, I think in 2 instances, but this interpretation does involve essentially definitions, and I think that it might be helpful to put a definition of floor area ratio in there as well, since it's pertinent to interpretation. And I think that the FAR appears later in the document, and someone reading it who's not really familiar with, like, where'd that come from? Just a suggestion. I'm not saying that.
I think we've added floor area ratio to section 11
Either way.
because it applies to both the 3A overlay and the downtown.
Right.
And we've also we've added some language to the definition of gross floor area to make it consistent.
Right.
And
Right.
we've since that draft, we've added,
Multifamily dwelling.
Right, and in the definition section of 11 of our zoning bylaw, I think could charitably be described as a mess. It really does need to be,
it's thin. It's missing
and
some
it's all
words.
mixed up. I mean, sometimes the definitions appear under a certain subsection and other times they don't. So you just have to plow through it looking for definitions, and it's a little bit of a problem. So I think if you will bear with me, I will try and send you these edits. You can do with them what you will, but I did find some typos, some spacing, some punctuation. But, usually in doing a final edit, you can use word perfect, find and replace, so that if you use the word district, you capitalize it in one place and not in another, you can fix that type of thing. But I did find those kinds of inconsistencies. And it's please don't take it the wrong way.
No. And I welcome your edits. They'd be very helpful for us. I can tell you that I'm hopeful a lot of them have already been addressed because we have been continuing to go through it and to comb through for these kinds of things.
Well, to
But-
the extent you get us something in a week, I could defer my editing to see what you give us in a week, to see if these kinds of minor, really, issues are resolved. But they do have to be resolved, because when this is introduced into our zoning bylaw, we really don't want to have mistakes. And of course, I don't know if you're aware of this, but the planning board, in doing its zoning amendments for town meeting, we found that the zoning bylaw that was posted on our website was actually not the correct one.
Which is why the numbering was off. in our second or first draft, at least.
whatever. So, yes, you now have the official version, I'm sure.
Before the public has an opportunity to speak, I'd just like to say one more thing for the planning board, unless there's other technical things that you wanted to.
No, that was
I just
it.
wanted to acknowledge that I know this process has been full of interruptions, full of distractions, full of things that were kind of counterproductive to what the goals were. And I just wanted to offer a note of appreciation and understanding of what the challenges are that you've been up against here, and appreciate all your work under, tight timing and many conflicting issues. So whatever that's worth. So
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I will just add that for any of you, if you do have direct markups that you've done, and I would say, Marnie, I'm pretty good at reading whatever handwriting you have. I would encourage you to provide it to us as soon as possible. That gives us the most time to be responsive to it. We can, of course, do a final revision, final look after the draft to provide you on the 27th for your meeting on the 3rd. But more time would enable us to be more consistent and thorough in addressing all of those issues.
Want to open it for public comment?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Erin Crowley, 1 Appaloosa Lane. I was at the select board meeting last night, and I just want to first say I'm really pleased with the conversation I heard tonight. I thought there were really thoughtful suggestions and topics to talk about moving forward with 3A. And I didn't know that was going to happen based on what was presented on behalf of the planning board last night at the select board meeting. It was presenting that the planning board had a lot of concerns with moving forward. There were suggestions that UTILE wouldn't have been able to accept the edits, that the legal representation wouldn't have enough time. There were misrepresentations of facts, for example, suggesting that we would only lose $28,000 in grant funding from the state if we did not comply with 3A. And then also there was a moment where there was a suggestion that the Winthrop School lot might come back under consideration, which, as you all know before the plans, it's not in there. And for me, it felt like what the planning board was focused on was opposing 3A rather than doing their due diligence to move this forward. Why I am grateful for you spending this evening giving thoughtful feedback and asking questions is, first, I do believe very strongly that we have a housing crisis in Massachusetts and in Hamilton. Today, the Boston Globe had a story about polling showing that most people in our state know we need more housing. Most of those people can't show up to meetings like tonight because for other reasons, but most people are in support of more housing. And I want Hamilton to be a part of the solution, like the 130 other communities who've already complied with 3A. The second reason I would say I am here is I'm very concerned about the ramifications of not complying with 3A. I know that you all have a letter from Representative Kristen Kastner laying out the grants that could be at threat, and I would say, given the funding that the town is receiving this year, she has identified hundreds of thousands of dollars that will be at risk if we do not become compliant with 3A by July 14th. I think the state will continue coming back with ways to make towns more compliant as the number of communities that are not compliant become a smaller and smaller number. So I will stop there and just say that my ask is I would love to see this committee give thoughtful feedback and then get behind a plan. I'm concerned with what was brought up last night about just sort of checking the box and having a town vote and saying it's going to go down in flames anyways. You will achieve that by not being representative of this plan, by not putting your thoughtful feedback in, making sure it's one that you can get behind. If it does go down in a town vote, we will have lots of things to worry about as a town regarding our finances. There'll be more conversations. So I would just encourage this body to take their job seriously, give feedback, work through the timeline that has been set, which I think is achievable based on what I've heard this evening on the feedback. Thank you.
To address your point, I think what the planning board was concerned about was because the timeline is so short, the opportunity for the public to really understand the complexity of this document is very circumscribed. And if they don't understand it, they may reject it. And so if the town, and what the planning board really wants is to have a positive outcome here.
Right.
And so if the public doesn't understand the document, for whatever reason, they're focused on the school consolidation, the document is not readily understandable without some kind of educational process, that if the town does not, rejects 3A, we're non-compliant, the same way we would be if we postponed it and spent more time in public engagement. That's the thrust of what the planning board was attempting to convey to the select board.
I appreciate that. I think that's a misrepresentation of what's happened. I think the planning board, I was at the last meeting where this was presented to this group, and the conversation was entirely focused on how to oppose 3A and lawsuits and the auditor. So I think you're right. It's a fait accompli that that we're here. We are now because it has been put off for so long. So I appreciate that you want to educate the public. I think we've got a very smart public that will be able to digest this and think it through. I think what's going to happen is that all of the misrepresentation has taken over, and people have inaccurate information on social media about what this is, about what the repercussions are. And I last night I felt like the planning board was responsible for perpetuating some of that misinformation.
I would, Marty, can I just address the $28,000, which was not misinformation? The $28,000 was from our previous planning board director, and what I was stating with the $28,000 is the town of Hamilton generally doesn't get the grants that are written in the actual law of 3A. And when I asked the town planner how much money we have ever gotten from those grants, it was $28,000. I was not saying we were going to lose $28,000 in the future. We could lose nothing. We could lose more than that. I don't know. All I was saying was $28,000 is all we've ever received from those grants that are in jeopardy.
Hi, my name is Nancy Baker, and a lot has been said about the downtown area, but nothing's been said about Asbury North. And I kind of wanted to understand a little bit more about the thinking there and why those parcels were selected, and also understand on the parcel that there's a 40B that I heard was approved for 45 units. If the overlay zoning goes into effect for the 3A, that would allow for more units, and I've done a quick and dirty number count on my pad here, and it's 3.94 acres, so I'm assuming that you could increase the number of housing there to maybe 60 units. Would the zoning then facilitate a change in that project to the 60 units?
I would think that the, it's Harbor Light Community Partners, they would have to get another comprehensive permit to do something like that, or change their model. I mean, right now, they have a comprehensive permit to build 45 units, and that's very low-income housing. It's 60% or less of AMI. So
So that wouldn't meet 3A because it can't be.
That would not meet 3A. That's-
Also, it's also true, for example, that development in 40B occurs in the middle of the lot, and once it is built, it'll be completely economically infeasible to make any additional multifamily dwelling units around it. And the same would apply also to the Canterbrook development, which is quite expensive and very new, and it would be economically, make no economic sense to try and add multifamily units to that piece of land. And so I think that the choice of that area was done wisely as being an area that we would allow to develop according to 3A density, but within our lifetimes it will not be economically feasible for that to happen.
Okay, my concern was the two intersections there of Arbor Street and Highland, the two of them, one in front of the gas station and the other one a little bit further down. Those two are prone to accidents. There's poor visibility in those locations.
I think they
and
are doing a
difficult to
traffic
see.
study on that.
What?
I believe they're doing a traffic study on that.
I know they're looking at sidewalks, to
Yeah.
extend sidewalks
Yeah.
down to those two developments.
The older chief was,
Yeah, I think as part of the comprehensive permit, there was some discussion about sidewalks.
Yep.
Because I remember with both the other development, the 10 units of, that Habitat is building, I was really concerned about the kids playing on Asbury Street. I mean, riding their bikes and that type of thing, or coming out of the driveways the way kids do, and running smack into a car, because regardless of the speed limit, people go really fast on Asbury Street.
Yeah, and if you're turning from Asbury Street onto Highland, that's a pretty sharp turn,
Oh,
and the
yeah.
visibility is
No, the
very poor in
visibility,
that location.
the visibility is bad. I mean, turning from Asbury onto Highland, you have to look left, and
Right, because
maybe I shouldn't say this, but the older you are, the harder it is to look that far left. So yes, it's not an ideal intersection, so,
I think the sentiment there is, that's about, in that one small area, it's about 70 units now between the three different developments.
yeah,
40B, and that intersection is getting worse and worse with all the traffic.
worse and worse, yeah. Yeah. They might have to do something with respect to that intersection, the way that was done further up Highland. It's not Winthrop, what is, no, the little cross street that goes up to Waldingfeld.
Yeah.
Oh, Goodhue Street.
this one out of my head.
I know it's Goodhue, because I live on that
Goodhue
street.
Street,
Yes,
yeah, exactly, yes.
Even
it's-
though they've posted 25-mile-an-hour signs, people still speed
Right,
at high rates of
Right.
speed. It's hard to go get my
Right.
mail without worrying about
Right.
crossing that
but there are
street.
the barriers there now on Goodhue Street.
Thanks.
Tosh Blake, Sagamore Street. Hello?
Yes.
Yes, Tosh.
Oh, you hear me?
ahead.
Good, thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment. I was at the meeting last night, the select board meeting, and I'd like to back up what Marnie and Emil were saying, particularly about postponing possibly till fall or later, and it might become moot depending on what the courts say about 3A. I think it's, irresponsible of the select board to kind of try to rush into having a vote when we don't have all the information about what's going to happen with 3A. I think Ms. Crowley spoke about earlier on Zoom about being pro 3A, but obviously we may not have to go that route, and it's unclear how they would benefit our town. There are obviously big risks if we are subject to 3A if we don't have to be, and can basically defeat it legally. The Globe has mentioned certain odd things. It says we're losing population in the state, and native-born Massachusetts residents are declining, yet our population is increasing. One could argue that's artificially because of our state policies of allowing people to come here and live here for free and take up housing. The state policy has made it a manufactured housing crisis. It's not actually a real crisis; it's a fake crisis. As far as Winthrop school site goes, it may not be in the 3A zone, but obviously it would be up for redevelopment if the school consolidation plan goes forward. So that would be another concern, even if it's not technically 3A. I think it'd be prudent, given all of the sort of rancor and negative opinions about 3A right now, to protect the form-based code, to postpone that, because people are going to be voting against everything, including the form-based code, which you've all worked so hard on, UTO, the planning board, et cetera, if 3A is still kind of on the dock for a premature special town meeting. So again, just to repeat, I'd like to back up what Marty and Emil said, it's more prudent to postpone that for a later date, the form-based code vote, and 3A vote, and have the special town meeting addressing both of those to the fall or later. And just to at least have a better chance of form-based code passing without too much trouble. And of course, as we know, the select board will try to bring back 3A as many times as they can until they can pass it, but so we don't have to worry about that so much. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tosh.
Thank you. Do we have any more public comment?
Hi, Deb Safford, Maple Street. I have a few questions, some of which I think you guys can answer. With the yellow district for the, is it Willow Street Residential, I think it is? Just wondering how those lines were drawn. I noticed it kind of went in on the first row of houses on Linden Street, and I'm just wondering how it was determined what that shape should be. Do you want to answer that, and then I'll just keep going, or?
Happy to. So it's,
Could you speak in the mic?
we went back and forth quite a bit. I will say that it's ultimate, the size of that district is very informed by 3A. But it was about having the right amount of parcels that were within a certain distance of Willow and then coming off at right angles. So you're sort of getting a kind of optimizing, let's say, travel distance to the commuter rail.
Just seemed like there were some people whose houses we knew were not in that, and I was just wondering about the way it kind of jogged in like that.
Yeah, I was just going to add one more. We've generally tried to keep it, as sort of embedded in what Matthew was saying, but we tried to keep it one parcel depth on Willow, except for where there's some like really irregular parcels where we were kind of trying to keep it a consistent depth based on the typical parcel depth. And then you'll notice, I'm sorry we don't kind of have a map that we're all looking at, but it jots up sort of north and west a little bit of Railroad Ave, which was also sort of responding to, if we're going to expand that district beyond just that first parcel depth, that the best place to do that is in support of the Railroad Ave existing commercial district and the amenities there and the relationship there to really try to support those businesses. So that was the other part of the logic.
Okay, great.
It also does extend to the Housing Authority property, which is one of the
Yeah, I figured that part. I just was worried, I was just curious about the jog on Linden Street. There was this funny kind of jog in and thinking about who lives there. Another question I have is about the parking. There's a lot of focus on parking, and I know that there's sort of trends and styles of, how and where one should park and whether you have a little garage or don't have a garage. I also know people like to have play space, and I'm just curious about the concept and the focus on parking in the back, which is probably where the yard would be, where the kids would play, especially if the house is in the front. And I'm just wondering about that sort of philosophy to mandate that people's yards should be a driveway. I don't understand, if that's just the trend now, or is this, how much of that, of the stylistic stuff that we're talking about is just sort of current trends and thinking of how houses are done? Our downtown was built at a time in the world, where things are just done differently. Some of them are fine. I just wonder why we're changing it. Is this just a trend that we're addressing, or is there a real reason why we would want to mandate that people's yards be a parking lot instead? If you have a response to that or not.
It is generally considered best practice to not park cars in the front yard in terms of benefiting the public realm, the appearance of things from the street. I know in the downtown residential, there's a few small things in the front, but for the most part, they're usually off to the side. And many of them have garages in the back. So in this case, it was also contextual. We're allowing enough setbacks that people can navigate that. And if they want to have one car, there's less asphalt. And we're not requiring it to be all the way in the rear. It only has to be set back as far as the building is.
I see, okay.
So it can be on the side.
Another thing that I've been talking about for at least a year is wondering why, I understand and appreciate what we're doing with the form-based code. I think your graphics were really good, showing sort of this is a conforming lot and this is actually not what you're doing. And that part of what you're addressing is to sort of be more consistent with what the rules are to match sort of what is and make it easier to understand. So I think that there's some benefit in that form-based code, but because it's so tied to a density of 3A requirement, I've been asking to have the ability to have the town vote on form-based code in the downtown to address those zoning things. and then be able to vote on a density requirement that the state is mandating that we do. And we're not doing that. We're commingling it into one vote. And I just am wondering if the board can, you guys, if there's a warrant ability to separate out those elements of form-based code, which have been so well thought through and were the original reason that most of us thought we were approving the UTL consultants a year and a half, however long ago it was. We thought it was really to address the downtown, not 3A. I know that in the fine print in the back, it said something about 3A, but, I think that was at least a little deceptive to get it through, not your fault, but the town's fault. And I just am wondering, is there still not a way that we can separate out the density? And I'm not against some density. I think housing is something that we want to address as a town, but we would never put 350 units in the downtown area without a gun to our head. And I just think that we want to think about that and allow the town to understand what that means. And is there not a way that we can separate that out so that the form-based code can stand on its own and the density can be addressed and understood? And some people will vote for it and some people may not vote for it, but at least, diversity of point of view is an important thing to recognize. And doing so would allow that diversity of point of view to come out. Is there a comment on that?
I do have a comment. I just want people to know that the density of 15 units is the minimum.
Right.
And we have no control. They might double or triple that.
Right.
And we have no control because they've taken away all our checks and balances. So, yeah, it's scary when you think about what could possibly happen. And none of it is affordable.
Right. That's sort of my next point.
None of it is
So,
affordable.
So is there a way, just to answer that question, is there a way to have the warrant and the product pull out the density from those rezoning requirements that we seem to want to address as a town?
I think at this point, as a practical matter, the answer is an unequivocal no. There's no way of separating this product into those two buckets, if you will. They're inextricably tied together. And the form-based code is designed to ameliorate the very problems you're addressing. So that with the floor area ratio and the other metrics that are set forth in UTIL's work product here, that form-based code is intended to keep the scale of any proposed 3A development to ones that are similar to what exists in town now.
And do we know from any court cases or any reality where form-based code has actually been upheld in a by right 3A construction project?
Well,
Remember, there are other dimensions to the zoning,
Yeah.
setbacks, heights, parking. And so if you have, a certain set of, if you have a certain lot size and you have a certain setbacks, heights, parking requirements, it's difficult to get much more than 15 units per acre. So the fear that somehow there'll be an explosion of development with 30 or 40 or 50 or 100 units per acre downtown is probably going to be rendered moot because of height, setback, and other requirements. So I wouldn't worry too much. I don't think we're worried too much about getting more dense development.
I'm just saying that what we're voting on is 350, I think, right, units? It's about 50% of our requirement is downtown, is that correct? So it's 735? So that's 360, right? So we are voting on a density equivalent of 360, call it, units in the downtown. That is taking single-family homes, that's like the American dream, to have an entry home. A lot of those homes were originally entry homes, and then people would move on. We are taking those homes, single-family homes, and making them multifamily to accommodate a density of 350 in the downtown. That is not affordable housing. That's not going to lower the cost of housing. You're shaking your head, but I'm telling you, it's a simple supply and demand. If you take away single-family homes, you lower the number of units available. Supply demand, it increases the demand. The price is going to go up because you have fewer supply. It's a basic economics. There's no, you can want that, that's okay. I'm just saying that single-family homes will become much more expensive, is one point. And the secondly, there has been, I presume, this board has not, and UTIL has not, and also something I've asked about for a year ago, is the impact study to the community. We all moved here for a reason, because we liked it. We liked the horse farms, we liked the small character, we liked the small schools, we liked our neighbors, we like our small town. We're not Lynn, we're not Revere, we're Hamilton, Wenham, Ipswich, right? So you don't have to live here, like no one's telling anyone to live here, but people lived here and have lived here for decades. And this is a fundamental transformation of the town by adding that kind of multifamily density to the downtown and another whole area without any impact study
Right.
on water and schools. And so I think if I could just finish this one thought, I just think that to go forward and to present to the town a vote that does not address the consequence of the vote, this is not just, we don't just vote something because the state tells us to. We would still be UK citizens if we did that, okay? And we're not. You know, they're people, they fought taxation against without representation, and there was a battle, because sometimes you have to like go to your inner core and be like, well, do I have to comply to this? Like, maybe we should push back. Maybe the numbers should be lowered, because we're actually on, our town line is 50% of our circle. Why has that not been addressed? I think it's reckless to go forward. Even if you want to comply, we should at least comply with less in some of our nuances of our town to be addressed. And it would be reckless to our residents to put forth something which does not represent the full impact of water, traffic, public service, schools. I mean, we're in a school battle like nothing else, right? And this is going to add thousands. So I just think that if we can have an ability to address those things, you'll have a much better chance, if people can understand really what the impact is, to say, yes, I want to do that, or no, I don't.
Right. Well, thank you. And you have to remember here that this is, the select board has scheduled a vote for June 26th.
Yeah.
This is not something that the planning board has control of. The select board controls the warrant. So this matter is on the warrant, and you just gave an impassioned oration of why you think 3A shouldn't be adopted. And I appreciate your sentiments, but they're right now not properly
To you guys.
directed to us, because we have this charge to make a report and recommendation. We haven't done that yet. We don't have a final product yet.
Okay.
When we review that, the planning board will make its report and recommendation, and then the FinCom will be, if this matter goes forward and there are warrant articles, it will be the FinCom that has to address
Address the cost, so
the
they will be
cost.
doing that.
It's
Okay.
not something that the planning board
Okay.
could do. We don't have
Yep.
any experts, any accountants.
You're not responsible as a planning
We're-
board to
we're not
look at the impact of the
responsible
decisions
as a
that are being
planning
made.
board.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly.
Yep, good. And so to clarify also, you guys are going to be meeting again on June 3rd, but the select board is meeting on June 2nd. When is the warrant?
June 10th.
June 10th is when the warrant closes? So this next review is what's going to,
Right.
Okay.
And I don't want to interrupt you, but to the extent there are other people, we're already past 9 o'clock.
Can I just ask one
and
more
it's-
question? Is there an element of owner-occupied versus, foreign investment that can be added into the zone that,
That
who's
would not
owning the
be part of-
property?
That
That's
wouldn't be
nothing that's part of
zoning.
a,
That's not part of zoning.
okay. All right.
I'm not sure we answered one of our questions, though. When the rubber meets the road, are there any litigations out there that show, does by right
Yeah.
overtake zoning or vice versa? Is there any, we keep on saying we have protection with the form-based code, but I'm
Right,
not sure we
thank
answered
you.
that question. Is there any indications out there from other cases or litigations or any kind of indication of when the rubber meets the road and the developer comes here and says, listen, I buy right, which takes precedence?
No, our building codes and our environmental codes, they all stay in place. I mean, a developer can't come into Hamilton and build a 15-story high-rise. That's not going to happen. I mean, that's not going to happen. And I don't, there's no way around the building code, even without the form-based code. That's not going to happen.
Has anyone also done an assessment of what our 40B requirement will be if this is approved?
10%.
Yeah.
Well,
Like, I
mean,
think that's an important
It would be predicated,
that's-
it would be predicated on units that were actually constructed.
right,
It's-
but the
and-
possibility, right?
Well, yeah, so, I mean.
Because that's a planning board thing, is how
It's
to meet
not
40B.
It's not
Is that
something
right?
that we can actually calculate. I think it would be difficult for anyone to calculate, because it's, at this juncture, it's completely unknown how much 3A housing would be built, because we do not have a public sewer system. So that's a huge limiting factor on capacity.
But that is the affordable housing piece that people are emotionally, appropriately concerned about, is the affordable part. And this, just to restate, 3A is not affordable
Oh, no,
housing.
it's not
Yeah,
affordable, no.
thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ann Arnett. I live at 10 Patton Drive. And I just want to say that I do support complying with 3A, and I support everyone getting on board with it so that we do have some control going into this. I'm really disappointed by some of the comments I've heard tonight that seem to be fear-mongering, and I'm really worried about the messaging that's going to go out about this ahead of a vote. And so I echo Ms. Crowley's statement that I hope we can all get together to make sure that there's really clear messaging, making it clear this has nothing to do with school consolidation or the Winthrop site, making it clear that,
Housing.
what's that?
Or affordable housing.
Or affordable housing.
Has nothing to do with
And,
that.
unfortunately, this feels like a microcosm of our larger political problems right now. I personally, I don't know what's wrong with some affordable housing. Like, why are we afraid of people who can't afford to live in our current housing? That's our town.
We've
afraid of
done
it.
a lot of work
What-
with
one-
40B. We have a bunch of them coming online.
I'm not talking
We
to
have
you
hundreds of-
exactly. I'm more like, I think this is like, unfortunately, there are some loud voices that are really intent on keeping the other out and saying things like, we came here because we want our horse farms. Well, the horse farms aren't going anywhere. This plan doesn't include building on horse farms. It doesn't even include building, it's zoning. And so some of those really, basic messages somehow have gotten really confused. And I have heard this from people over and over again, but I don't know everybody in town, and I don't have the opportunity to correct this, and not everybody's here tonight listening. And so I guess, again, I just really hope that the messaging can be clear. I will offer my services if you need support with, creating one-pagers, fact sheets, social media posts. Like, I'm on board to support this, and most importantly, I really want our whole town to be aligned with understanding rather than feeling like, they got swooped into this.
Thank you.
I'm Linda Preston from Highland Street. Nothing has been said about where else the other approximately 350 units plus would be put. Can you answer that for us, other than downtown?
Yes,
To make the
that's what the
731?
That's what the Asbury Street area is for.
How many units?
There's
does-
approximately
68?
30 units, 30 acres there? 25
20
acres? 25 acres at 15, if it's rezoned for 3A density, 15 units per acre, in theory, and I say that in theory, you could build, about 350 units there.
350 units.
Canterbrook and the land behind Canterbrook.
Okay, so it's, when you say 23 and 45, which came up for the Asbury Street, we need to think total units, and I haven't heard that number tonight for Asbury Street.
It's 19 acres.
Okay,
between-
I live about 1,000 feet from there, as the crow flies. One of the issues that is never addressed is water. And if you look at the water table on Highland Street, you will know that we do not have a water ban issue right now. We have water in the basements. And that has never been addressed well by the community. It's still a need. I have 2 sump pumps still running. You wouldn't think so, but we've had rain this spring. I have had rain in January with water in my basement. So I think the impact study that has been mentioned needs to be expanded, provided to the people, and thought about wider than a building. And for me, that impacts me enormously, and I'm only one of many in that neighborhood. We've asked for impact studies, as mentioned, for over a year. And even at the end of December, we asked again, and they said, oh, we don't have time now. We've got to get ready for the next big meeting. And then it was agreed that, yes, we will at least talk about it at the town meeting early April. Early April came, and the moderator would not let us talk about anything other than the school issue and shut down any other question that might have come up. So we still don't have an impact study. How many cars will come into our community if 731 units go in? And say there are 4 people even, but in each unit, that's close to 3,000 new people in Hamilton.
And there are only 7,000 some of us here now. So it's a
Exactly.
explosion.
It's almost 50% increase of our population. Have we thought about that? Have we thought about how many new students with
Ma'am,
that amount of population would come into our
Ma'am,
schools?
I'm going to, because of the time and the other people who want to speak, I think what's happening here is we're ending up with the kind of debate that really should happen at the special town meeting. Right now, we really want to look at the 4 corners of our document. And so the arguments that I've heard pro and con here are the arguments that will be made at the special town meeting. They're actually almost premature now because we actually haven't made our report and recommendation. We are still dealing with the draft document, but I understand everyone's sentiments, pro and con. You know, everyone, I hope this is a venue where we can all be civil. I think there's pro and con, and I personally can see both sides. I have my own personal opinion as to how we can succeed, and that might be to do as much public outreach as possible. But that said, we are proceeding with the assumption that we will go to a vote. The voters will decide up or down on 3A. But the arguments that I've heard so far haven't addressed really the 4 corners of our document. They've addressed the larger issue. And we could be here till midnight addressing that larger issue. And I think that for most of us, we understand the arguments. We've heard them. We've heard both sides.
So we want our community informed, and we're not.
That's
as
exactly
a
right.
general statement.
That's exactly right. The more
Help us
information,
to
the better.
do that. Help us to be reasonable, to vote with intelligence.
Right.
And thank you for all your good
that's something
work.
to address to the FinCom,
Yes.
John McGrath.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't know when they meet, but I'd
Tomorrow
point-
night at 7.
Oh, good for you, Beth. Tomorrow night at 7, go talk to them.
And then the following Wednesday at 7.
The FinCom is meeting
So I'll be brief.
Could you state your name, please?
Jack Simons, 245 Sagamore Street, and also representing my wife Kathy. We are 3A advocates. We believe there's a housing crisis, but I don't want to get into that debate. As you've said, that goes elsewhere. But I did want to appreciate what is obviously a very hard slog to come up with a good faith solution which will comply with the law, because 3A is the law. And just to urge you to move forward expeditiously and understand that I believe most of the community does not reflect some of the comments I heard earlier, the nativist, anti-immigrant, we're not Lynn, we're not Lawrence, which I think those sentiments scare people, but I've worked in Lawrence and Lynn, and this is never gonna be Lawrence and Lynn. This is always gonna be Hamilton, I think. So anyway, thank you for your very hard work.
Great, thank you.
Sandy Fisher, Greenbrook Road. I won't address anything that has already been said, but just a question, which is, it was talked about fear-mongering, and I don't think asking questions is fear-mongering. And I think people need to make intelligent decisions, and it is not a one-issue thing. It's not about just housing. It's not about just affordable housing. It's about all these other things. And when the state says that we can have no limit to the amount of bedrooms and no limit to the amount of occupants, how can we reasonably, as a town, figure out what the impact is really going to be to our town, what the impact is really going to be to our schools, and what the cost is going to be to our town? I'm talking about fear-mongering. I'm hearing we're not going to get any grants from the state.
Yeah, fear-mongering.
And that's fear-mongering, because we don't know that. And I've heard Ms. Herr say that she talked with someone and said, what is the amount of grants that we've actually received under these 4 categories from the state in the past? And it's $28,000. That's a fact. So unless the state is going to radically change what goes under, and just keep putting more and more grants under that we're not going to get, that's fear-mongering. There's a lot of fear-mongering going around, and I think what we need is facts. And the woman who spoke before me talked about a lot of units, 300 units or whatever, that could go on the property near her. Well, that's roofing, that's asphalt, that's runoff, that needs to be addressed. So that's all I'm saying, and I do want to say thank you to UTIL. I think they have done a really good job, and I'm understanding it more and more what they've done, and I appreciate that. And thank you very much for all of you. I know it's a hard job being on the planning board, and you have a lot of things to decide. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see we have some folks on Zoom with their hands up. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to speak before we go to those folks on Zoom? Okay, Kathleen Brill.
Thank you, Mark. I'm Kathleen Brill. I live on Knowlton Street in Hamilton. I won't repeat my comments from prior meetings, but I speak in support of compliance with 3A and in support of Hamilton doing its part to address the housing crisis in the Commonwealth. I echo Erin Crowley's concerns about the ways the view of the planning board were presented last night. It was distressing to hear that the planning board was recommending not bringing this to the town for a vote within the legally required time frame to which the town has already committed. As Erin mentioned, there are hundreds of thousands of dollars at risk. As the Supreme Judicial Court determined, the Attorney General's office is not limited to the enforcement provisions provided for in the statute, which means that additional state discretionary funds beyond those enumerated in the statute are at risk. This is documented in the letter from Representative Kasner on this exact point, which is in the meeting packets and available on the town's website, and I would encourage everyone to take a look. I do hear the chair's concerns about the complexity of the proposal and the task of educating the public, but I want to emphasize that the zoning code now is not a model of simplicity or accessibility, nor are most zoning codes in the state. With respect to the challenge of public education, I thought perhaps between Mark and UTL we might put together a brief FAQ, which could cover things like how this would apply to pre-existing non-conforming uses. I might also suggest putting some materials into the town paper to briefly summarize the proposal and perhaps address those FAQs in that document in the paper. And if it falls within UTL's budget, perhaps the planning department and UTL could host an open house where people's individual questions about how it would apply to them could be answered. It is important to educate people on this, and I think maybe we need to think outside the box a little bit about ways to do it. And as the speaker earlier offered, I'd be happy to help support these efforts if it would be useful. But all of this would require that the planning board get behind the plan and support it vocally and without hesitation in public. Calling it scary, calling it an explosion does not help. I hope the planning board will consider these suggestions. And thank you again to the board and to UTL for all the excellent work you've done so far.
Thank you.
Thank you. Megan Viader?
Hi, Megan Viaday from Essex Street.
Sorry about that.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'll be brief. I do support 3A. I think, as others have said, there is a housing crisis in Massachusetts, and it definitely needs to be addressed. And I just wanted to voice my opinion and echo what Ms. Brill said as well, that the important piece right now is to go forward with this in a timely manner, because we have a deadline on it. And if we don't, then we are really at risk of losing a lot of funding, and it's time to, as others have said, make this happen, get behind the plan, and then put it in the hands of voters, so that we actually have the chance to be in compliance with the law, which is not yet an opportunity for us as a town to do. So I would just wanted to state that and reiterate that we have so much potential loss here for funding, and this is now an urgent matter. So let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else online that would like to make comments? All right.
Okay. No one else in the audience? Yes, please.
Yes, please.
I just wanted to clarify for the applicant who asked for a postponement until July, what site was that for, please?
Oh, that was for a small wireless facility?
So it doesn't have anything to do with this?
No, nothing at all.
Okay, because you can tell I wasn't quite understanding.
No, it's kind of this small electrical box on top of a pole.
Okay. All right, thank you so much.
It requires a special permit under Section 7 of our bylaw, which is 21 pages long.
Any final comments?
Well, so we have our work cut out. I want to reiterate that when Emil and I attended the the select board meeting last evening, it is not because we personally have any agenda here, other than to ensure that the outcome of any vote is positive. And what we see here is a really tight deadline, because we have to make our decision on June 3rd. Today's May 20th. June 3rd is our next meeting. We do not have final documents. We don't have warrant articles. So when people say, get behind 3A, well, we have to get behind documents that can form the basis of warrant articles that can actually be put before the voters. It's not a simple task. It's not just, do you want 3A, yes or no? So I see on Facebook that the planning board is dragging its feet. In fact, we are not dragging our feet. We got a second draft of these documents on April 29th, and then we got another draft on May 6th, which is the one we're working on. And so the amount of work that we have left to do is not inconsequential. Some of it is busy work, but that said, we cannot put before the voters documents that are incomplete, have typographical errors, inconsistencies, and whatnot. They have to be legally credible, and they have to be such that the town can make an intelligent decision on what they're voting on. And it's not the planning board's job to evaluate the costs and benefits here. That is for the FinCom, and that is for experts that can make these types of projections as to what the cost might be. And they're, like so much here in the world today, they're impassioned people on both sides of this argument, as we have witnessed. But in seeking this postponement, it was simply because of the tightness of the deadline and the fact that there will be no opportunity for the planning board to do any public outreach before we have to vote on these articles on June 3rd. So that was the genesis of our concern. And we are aware that there is litigation challenging the metrics in the regulations issued by the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And so that is out there, and that could affect the number of units that Hamilton would be required to zone for. But that's not a topic for this evening. But with all that said, unless anybody has any further comments,
May I make a motion to adjourn?
I don't know.
Do
if
we
you'll
want to
get
close, do we need to close the hearing first?
No, we got to continue.
We have to continue the
Continue
hearing
it,
first,
okay.
so you may make a motion. But we can continue the public hearing until June 3rd at 7 PM.
So I make a motion to continue the hearing to June 3rd at 7 PM.
Yes, do I?
Second that?
have a second? We'll take a roll call vote. Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, aye.
Darcy Dale,
Darcy Dale, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So we'll be back here on June 3rd, and so we will be getting another draft May 27th. I urge everyone to pore over it and understand it, and we will have, I guess, little to no opportunity to change it at that point, except probably in minor detail. But think about how you want to consider a report and recommendation. And I hope when we are present on June 3rd, we will at least have drafts of the warrant articles that we'll have to look at.
And
So-
Zoe and Matt, to the extent that we get you comments for that final draft, you probably need those by tomorrow or Thursday at the latest, something like that. Okay, so if you have comments, please send them to me and I'll make sure they get to you too.
We need to make a motion.
Shall I make a motion to adjourn?
Please,
I second it?
yes. So let's cut this to the quick. All in favor of adjourning, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye. It's unanimous.